This is a recording with my very good friend Cameron John Robbins, the gentleman artist. And what we're proposing to do here is going to look through a series of portraits of historical figures as painted by the great man himself. And I will give my indications of what I see in a face. We will look both at the portraits and I will put some images then of those particular individuals beside them. And we'll discuss from both our perspectives and see where the lines meet. So, Cameron, it's over to you. I'm going to start sharing the screen and we'll choose the first image.
Okay. Mahatma Gandhi. A lot of my historical portraits have their origin in a chapter from Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. And in the chapter, Napoleon talks about his imaginary board of directors. We've all heard the idea that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and Napoleon Hill believed in that kind of idea, I think. And so he created for himself an imaginary board of directors. There were some people who were still living. I think Andrew Carnegie was probably on his board, almost certainly, and was living at least at the early part of Napoleon's career. But people like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln were also on his imaginary board of directors. And when he had a challenging question to answer, a puzzle to solve, he would imagine himself talking to this board of directors and getting their input. Anybody on his imaginary board of directors was somebody he regarded very highly. He admired them, he knew their stories. And I was rereading that some years ago, and it suddenly struck me like a bolt of light. Like, wait a minute. I'm a painter. I can paint my imaginary board of directors. And so it started with Washington and Lincoln, and it's carried on from there. And Gandhi is on my imaginary board of directors, and so that's one of the reasons I painted his portrait. He's also, like Lincoln and Washington and others, he's still very highly regarded around the world. And one of the things I admire most about him is summed up in the title of his autobiography, Experiments with Truth. I've heard criticisms of him, and I've heard people describe things about him that they find objectionable. And I have a couple issues with some of those accusations because of the assumptions that people have attached to the facts themselves. But what I particularly admire about him is, just as it says in the title, he was experimenting with truth. He was trying things out. He was trying to, at all times and in every way he could manage, looking for the better way, the better version of himself. He was just always striving upwards, starting with himself. And, if he came across something that seemed to indicate a place for improvement, he would experiment with it. He'd try it out. And I admire that principle tremendously and try to model it myself.
Yeah, it's a wonderful. I hadn't heard that from you before about painting those people being on your board, and that's that's a very powerful idea, very powerful story. Just going with this image, the portrait itself. One of the things I think you capture so well is the eyes, the power, the gaze, the power in his gaze, because we think of Gandhi as a very significant political figure, but he never actually held office. Yet he influenced the path of a nation.
Yes, he did.
And again, a very diminutive figure.
Yes.
But
it's something about the power of those experiments with truth, striving to live rightly, that influences and inspires people.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you see the nose there. Again, such a well-proportioned nose. In fact, almost too large in a sense. And that's, again, this was a man so driven,
Mhm.
and it's only because of the power of his drive and the power of his vision that he could influence so many people.
Mhm.
Just want to go to an image here, and then I'll refer back to the portrait as well. Obviously, the ears are not on the face, but they, in terms of face reading, they actually are very significant. And two things I want to refer to here with regard to his left ear. This little flap of cartridge at the front of the ear is called the tragus, and just behind it is what's called the tragal notch. And you'll notice with Gandhi, it's a very wide notch indeed. So when you see that, it's an indication of great generosity. And Gandhi could not have done what he did without an incredible sense of generosity, without a huge sense of caring about the people he was looking to help, support, influence, etc. You'll also note that he's quite a well-developed earlobe, and again, from the Oriental perspective, like you if you see, I know Gandhi was a Hindu, but if you ever see a representation of the Buddha always has very elongated earlobes. And that's because in Eastern terms, the earlobe was associated with spiritual wisdom. And it's not to say if somebody doesn't have long earlobes, they don't have spiritual wisdom, but it's
right.
When they have deep long earlobes like that, it's indicated that they're so deeply connected to what I would just call a deep inner knowing. So that's
I've heard it also described with Buddha. The way his ears are depicted is symbolic, much in the same way that, in Christian art, angels have wings and halos, and in some ways it's just a device. If you make a painting and you've got people and you've got angels, how do you make the distinctions clear? It's like, do angels actually have wings? No, but we put the wings on them in art so people know that's a person, that's an angel. It's just a device. And in the case of the Buddha, the enlarged ears are a symbol of his sensitivity to the suffering of the world. He hears the suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gandhi's ears certainly resemble that trope, if you, it may be the right word. And he certainly modeled that in his life, in real life. So,
there's one other thing I want to point out there with Gandhi, and it's going back to your portrait, Cameron, is you notice the right eyebrow is kind of angled down towards the eye. And when you see that on somebody, this is somebody who's well accustomed to giving orders, giving instruction. So they can often be actually quite autocratic. But then there's giving instruction and there's giving orders. And Gandhi had the ability to give instruction, which influenced people to make decisions, to take action, rather than necessarily giving orders.
It would take some research to verify this, but it makes me wonder if an innate tendency to give orders might have been natural with him. And one of his experiments with truth was recognizing that that is a less effective way of interacting with people. And it's harder but more effective to inspire. And so maybe that indication from his eyebrow, it's like, well, yeah, if he had been the most natural version of himself, he might have been much more autocratic, but because he was striving upwards, he found a way to transcend those natural impulses and act in better ways.